we are discussing industrial relations and conflict management. In our last lecture, we were talking about industrial relations in terms of various types of industrial relations, and we also had an example of participative management as a special type of industrial relations, about which we are going to discuss in details in our next lecture. Industrial relations manager has number of roles to play, and in addition to keeping peace at the place of work, industrial harmony, and of course some of the day-to-day duties, an important aspect of industrial relations manager's job, or we can say in general a manager's job in a small industry, perhaps you may not have a separate person a different person, the separate department doing this kind of activity. So maybe you can say that this is also the duty of a manager to understand conflict at the place of work. So in today's lecture, we are going to pay attention to this aspect of conflict management. We will be talking about conflict in organizations in terms of say the personal conflicts, group conflicts, organizational conflicts, because conflicts may occur at any time. So, when we are looking at the conflict management, we have to know that conflict is a universal phenomenon in society, in the business world itself, when different firms compete in the same market, and there occurs conflict among them. So, in the business world itself, when different firms compete with the same market, there occurs this conflict, and within the same organization often there is conflict among different departments over any kind of a jurisdictional domain. So, as we were talking about the departments and the various organizations and also individuals. The production department does not turn out goods to the exact requirement of the marketing department, could be one situation, and so conflict. Labor department conflict is a frequent occurrence in many organizations. Even there is conflict at times within the personality of the individuals or personality of the same individual. So, conflict is thus a reality for managers, and in fact this becomes an important aspect of the management of role of a manager in the organizations. So we can't complete perhaps a course without understanding little bit about what happens at the place of work in terms of conflict management. Stephen Robbins, I am sure all of you have looked at that book on management, has called interactional view of conflict, which is inevitable in organizations no matter how they are formed and how they are run. So, the task of management is to accept conflict as a fact of organizational life and therefore to manage. Organizational conflict may be defined by James Stoner, as disagreement between two or more organization members, or groups arising from the fact that they must share scarce resources or work activities, and or from the same fact they have different status, goals, values or perceptions. Are you understanding this? Is it too complicated? Maybe you can think about this, that the organizational conflicts maybe because the resources may be scarce, and so people may like to have something, and suppose the computers are given in the departments. Few computers are there, everyone doesn't have access to that, and someone wants that why I have not been given computer, or maybe the computer time. Conflict may arise at the level of individuals. Some departments might say that such and such department has been introduced with new technology and perhaps the computers, why not our department? There may be conflicts. And also within the organization in terms of competing with other say the other organizations. Okay. And in the era of this globalization, we find that the conflict, even though we are growing, we are really progressing very fast. At the same time, because of many reasons, there could be a situation which may give rise to conflicts. And so, the different status, different goals, different values, and of course, the different perceptions of people might give rise to certain conflicts. So, Professor Joseph Lederer, he has talked about conflict in terms of the situations in which a person or group disagrees over means or ends, and he may try to establish their views in preference to others. So, conflict may also be sometimes in terms of establishing one's own views. So, some sort of a domination a person might like to have. So, the conflict becomes inevitable sometimes, and you want to prove your point, and so there may be a conflict. So, such situations are also there in organizations. So, there are certain having understood that what is the meaning of conflict, what we are actually trying to manage in this situation, we should now look at the effects of conflict. So, first we will take up the positive effects, the good effects of functional aspects of conflict. So, see, everything has a positive point, but there may still be a few negative points. So, let us have this analysis. So, the good effects of conflict. First, the conflict may generate healthy competition, which is good for better output. So, this is a very healthy kind of a conflict. So, not that conflict is always bad, because the word as you might think that okay, conflict that means it's always negative. No, it may also have some positive effects, we can say that. So, little bit of conflict in terms of competition is good for organizations and for a healthy functioning of a system. Then it provides some persons with challenges, bringing out their abilities and giving them activities with interest and zeal for some people. See, we have seen earlier in our discussion that there are individual differences, and so in terms of some kind of a hardware, whereas the decisions that we take are the final decisions, in terms of the human systems, we have to understand that there are individual differences, and that is why also in conflicts we can see that there are individual differences, and that is why the point here we have written is that it provides to some persons. Okay. So, few persons will actually feel that as a challenge. Then it may also lead to search for solutions. Conflict may lead to search for solutions. It is often an instrument of organizational innovation and change. Stoner has said that, because we are all looking for management of change, management of innovations, which we are going to discuss in another 1 hour, management of change, that is going to come in our discussion. So, when we are looking at the organizational conflict, sometimes they may also be actually the instruments of change and innovation. Open conflict and the opportunity to express one's feelings may have the ultimate effect of assuming them. A deeper understanding may develop among the parties involved. So, Davies, a psychologist, management psychologist we can say, has proposed this. You can read this, the open conflict opportunity, because when there is conflict opportunity, then you perhaps have that opportunity of expressing your views, sometimes rather aggressively, but then we have to see that how does that really matter, okay, how much of conflict is needed, okay. We are coming to that some of those points as well just now. So, conflict has also got certain strategic implications. We have, in terms of strategic decisions, we have to take into consideration some of the issues related to conflict. In terms of strategic decisions, it might be used to keep some persons engaged who would otherwise do greater untrained damage elsewhere. Okay. Again, the issue of individual differences is coming, and the manager's strategy, okay, for the allocation of people and jobs. A boss might encourage conflict among subordinates so that they are best likely to oppose him. Okay. This is to generate some kind of a discussion so that the creativity might come out. Okay. Not really to have a conflict in the real sense, but boss might create such a condition that people come out with certain ideas which may generate some conflict, some discussion. Conversely, subordinates may keep alive a conflict so that the boss may be too busy to supervise them closely. Other way around is also possible in the strategic sense, that sometimes the subordinates might create conflict, okay, so that the boss doesn't find so much time to really supervise them. Then management may encourage conflict among two or three, or as we have discussed earlier, and we are going to discuss that in great details also later, that the organizations might have trade unions more than one in some organizations. So, sometimes 2 or 3 trade unions, there may be conflict, so that the position of each might remain weak strategically. Are you getting that? So, from manager's point of view, we are looking at some of these strategic situations, that the conflict among these unions will keep each one of these union weak, okay, and so that may be sometimes in the interest of the management. But then later when we are looking at the issue of participative management, then you will see that there are healthier ways of actually managing such situations. We will come to that in our next sessions. In addition to some of these positive effects that we have discussed, there are number of bad or dysfunctional effects of conflict as well. When we have talked about the positive effects, what we were trying to suggest that if these are taken into consideration, these may have positive gains for the organization in the long term. But then conflict management is not that I can say bed of roses, because bad effects are also there, and so we have to also look at the dysfunctional aspects of conflict. Conflict affects the physical and mental well-being of the individuals. it gives rise to continued tension, frustration, and the various physical consequences. This we are talking about not only for the subordinates, but for the managers, for the group members. So, everyone who is in conflict is actually also getting affected in many ways. So, which has bad consequences for himself, herself, and the organization. Conflict disrupts work and drains off your energy and resources that could be developed to some constructive purposes. See, if you are doing conflict, if you are doing means if you are getting involved into a conflict, then what happens? All your creative energy or see, after all, someone has limited energy, and if you are draining out your energy in conflict, obviously you are not saving your energy for creativity. And so, if you are too much into conflict, for that matter also into negative thinking, where is the time and energy for you to do positive thinking or the positive creativity? That is the idea here, that is one of the negative aspects of conflict for individuals as well as for the organizations. So, it disrupts the and drains out actually your energy. That is the point we are trying to make here. Then conflict stands in the way of realizing organizational goals. In our earlier discussions, we have seen that there are number of goals which an organization is trying to achieve for its survival and growth, and if there are conflicts in organizations, then the possibility of realization of this growth minimizes. In fact, whenever we hear that there is a conflict going on in any organization or in any department, people do talk about that, because that percolates in the whole organization, and you will see that that department or that organization will not work very successfully, because the manager all the time his energy is going in solving those problems, isn't that? If you have not observed, maybe you can observe it and prepare some case studies on that. The bad effects of conflict often endure and spread. Okay, what I was just trying to tell you. Okay, and it's and the ill feeling created by conflict, this persists even after the whole conflict has been solved. Okay, even then that ill feeling is there in the hearts of people. Okay, so conflict actually has a very long term effect. It takes lot of time really to actually wash out those feelings. So, it's the better strategy is not to have any kind of a conflict, and if you do not want to have any conflict, obviously you have to have some kind of a preparedness in terms of your positive thinking. But then can really all organizations gear them up for that, but that is a challenge. Another bad effect of conflict management is that too many conflicts ultimately engulfs the organization. So, if the organization has one conflict here, the other one is there, the third one there, all departments have conflicts, then all managers and the chief manager all the time, instead of really expanding, really developing some kind of new business or having very good HRD activities, they are all the time busy solving this conflict. So, can we really have these conflicts? Now, we are talking about types of conflict. Having understood that what conflict is, what are the positive and negative effects of conflict, we are talking about types of conflict. Types of conflict could be of different nature. It could be a structural conflict, it could be a role conflict. Role conflict, as you understand, all of us play many roles, and if you are playing role of a supervisor on the one hand and perhaps friend on the other in the same organization, then sometimes you may be in conflict because you want to satisfy both the roles. Similarly, for women, a role conflict may be in terms of a family responsibility and being a manager. So, the role conflict could also be there, which affect organizational life. Then institutionalized conflict in terms of within an organization, there may be a conflict, in terms of the activities in different departments, and according to the person or the units involved, conflict may be divided into 5 principal classes. So, we have seen that it could be a structural conflict, it could be a role conflict, or it could be institutionalized conflict. Okay. So, at the level of organizational we can say components, and also personal you can say the person organization fit component, that we can put it that way. And so, what we are now trying to look at, that what are the classes of conflicts in terms of person, further to understand that. The conflict within the same person, now we are talking about, because we have seen an organization, the major component of an organization is the performer, the person who is actually working. So, at this moment we are trying to look at that type of conflict, his conflict. Conflict within the same person, we will call that as the intrapersonal conflict within the same individual. Okay. It may be because of some, we have seen, it may be because of some frustration, some expectation, or some other personal reasons. Conflict between 2 or more persons within the same organization, this is known as interpersonal conflict. 2 persons are there and they have the conflict. This conflict may be again because of some interest, because of some kind of values, or it may because of some roles that they have to play, or it may be because of so many other reasons of, say, power sharing or communication. So, there may be conflict between 2 persons in an organization, which could be interpersonal conflict. There are many sources of interpersonal conflicts, and there are many in fact methods and strategies which we use to actually manage this situation. Now, conflict between 2 or more groups in the same organization, these are the intergroup conflict. These conflicts could be between departments, which are the formal groups, and also these could be between the informal groups. In an organization, as maybe you have observed that we have groups of different types, the formal groups and informal groups. The formal groups are of course departments, as I said just now, and the informal groups are the cliques. There are some friendship groups in an organization. Every organization has these types of groups, and sometimes the conflict may also be in between these interest groups. So, the departmental conflict, perhaps the manager in charge of that may look into that, but also manager's job is to keep the eyes and ears open in terms of having conflicts when you have the informal grouping in organization. Conflict between individuals and the organization as a whole, okay, this is individual organization conflict. Sometimes the individual does not want to accept the norms of the organizations. Okay. Normally, when we join an organization, there is an implied assumption that I accept the norms, codes of conduct, and all the discipline of the organization, also the culture of the organization. But some of us are in conflict with organization, if I do not say all the time, many times at least. Okay. And this conflict, is not that everyone is doing that, most of us do not do that, but some people do that. Because of many reasons, there may be an adjustment problem, or there may be a rebellious attitude in general, there may be some other issues. So, the conflict may be there between an individual and organization. Conflict between groups and organizations as a whole. So, group organizational conflict. Some particular department has some conflict with the organization because they might feel that we are not getting the due that is given to the other departments, or some sort of a lack of equal treatment is there. Okay. So, that kind of a conflict might also occur in an organization. Now, intrapersonal conflict, when we are looking at, I will just talk to you very quickly about these conflicts. Two persons competing the job offers could be one example. Then two opposing needs or goals of the individuals. We are talking about intrapersonal, okay, within the individual. Then two different roles or tasks that the person might have to do. I have already given you an example of role conflict there. So, two different courses of action, which one to take, which not to take. Should I take up this job? Should I tell this to my seniors, or should I keep quiet? Okay, that kind of a conflict. You feel like saying something, but still something pulls you back that no, I shouldn't say that. So, there is within yourself there may be a conflict. Fred Luthans, again you must have read or maybe that is one of the reference books on management. Professor Fred Luthans has referred to 4 important sources of conflict within the individual which prevent adaptation to the work situation. These are competing needs and roles, we have discussed that, different ways in which drives and roles can be expressed, barriers which intervene between drives and goals. There could be number of barriers. Okay. Your achievement sometimes could be a barrier. Say the money that you are going to get between two situations could be a barrier in your decision making. Okay. You want to do something, okay, you do not want to do something, but what you do not want to do, you may have a lot of money there. Okay. So, there may be barriers. Both positive and negative aspects are attached to the desired goals. And when we have to look at these aspects of conflict management, then we have to see that the resolution of interpersonal conflict is important. Interpersonal conflict could be resolved the common sources of through number of factors, and some of the common sources are the difference in needs, values and attitudes, positional or status differences, difference in the style of working, shared goals, a single goal towards which 2 or 3 people may be running, but it is only one who can ultimately get it. Tendency on the part of some people to compete with others, that's yet another issue that we have to look into. Here the exploratory tendency on the part of some people, that may also have to be considered in the conflict management. Perceptual distortions about other people due to stereotypings, a snap judgment, halo effect and the like. Stereotyping, all of you understand? We have the different ways of perceiving people. Some are the stereotyped perception. If someone is actually perhaps holding a bag of books or something of that kind, perhaps with specs or something, you have a stereotyped image of a professor perhaps. Okay, so we have the stereotyping of different behavioral situations. Okay, that may or may not be true. Okay, but that is a social perception, social situation. Okay, with our experience we have seen people like that, and so we have a stereotyped image. So the stereotyping actually affects our snap judgment. Okay, and that is why the perceptual distortions might take place. That is one of the reasons perceptual distortions might take place, because of many other reasons as well, but we are just discussing as the main we can say reason. Then in the intergroup conflict, Luthans has again suggested 4 structural areas of the organizations where conflicts are more pronounced. These are hierarchical conflict. Hierarchy, you understand, we have discussed about hierarchy, different levels of hierarchy in an organization. Functional conflict, the functional areas in which the conflict might occur. Then line and staff conflict, again you have the line and staff organizations, and the conflict might occur between line and staff we can say personnel. Then we also discuss formal and informal conflict. Few examples I have given you in my discussion earlier. Let us move on to formal and informal conflict. There are particularly true and traditional types of organizations, and modern organization design according to Luthans also contains potential conflict situations. The project matrix, the project organization, the matrix organization in particular have structurally created conflict. There are different types of organizations, and that which we have discussed earlier, and the matrix organizations might, and also the project organizations might create more conflict. The sources of conflict, then we move on to the other aspect, the sources of conflict. Even though in our earlier discussion some sources are emerging, but to make you understand that better, you can take this, this is sort of a repetition. So I'll quickly look through that. Sharing of resources, we have already discussed some of those. Status differences, differences in goals, unequal division, role ambiguities, differences in values and perceptions, different reward systems, and all this, that means that was in short I can say that this is the some sort of a gist of the discussions that we were already having. So I just wanted to repeat that to make you understand that better, that what are the sources of conflict which we have discussed. So from here we move on to the resolution management of intergroup conflict, and there are many methods which a manager perhaps could use. for resolving or reducing interpersonal conflicts. Some of these we are trying to talk about, which of course will relate to the type of conflicts that we might have, that removal of differences, smoothing of the areas of conflict, better understanding of each other's functions, use of authority, coordination by a liaison, restructuring of organizations. So, we are talking about so the restructuring of organizations I was trying to talk about. Let me explain these concepts once again. I'll go back to these points, and once again I will be explaining some of these points. Restructuring, let me just go back to some of these points, and which I will explain to you, that how are we actually going to resolve the management issues of intergroup conflicts. There are many methods, as we have said. Okay, removal of differences. Now, removal of differences could be at the individual level, at the group level, or at the organizational level. But here we are talking about the intergroup differences. Now, when manager is trying to play his role as a manager, he has to see that he at least obviously in his behavior there is no such action which suggests that there is difference between different groups. Groups here, we mean the formal groups we are talking about. Do you recollect that we were talking about the formal groups and informal groups in an organizations? Now, so when we are looking at the removal of differences, we mean that the manager has to look into these differences in very positive manner. Okay. From here we go to the next point, that is the smoothing of the areas of conflict. Sometimes conflict might occur in different departments in terms of, see, many times because of resource allocation, many a times because of some of the growth opportunities, many a times because of the attitudes, and there may be many such reasons. Suppose there is an opportunity of going abroad for training, for learning any new thing, or for any kind of collaboration that the company might be having. Now, if manager decides that people from only department, the first department will go, okay, and the second, third and fourth department perhaps they are not getting this opportunity, they will have some kind of a conflict, that why aren't we getting this opportunity of going abroad and learning a new technology or whatever. So, this area has to be smoothened by the manager. Manager has to actually bring them together and discuss with them the modalities of the training programs that they are going to give, and then how different people will get, or they are at least likely to get, this opportunity when time comes. And so, if if manager is discussing with them and trying to sort out some of these areas, then the possibility is that there will be lesser number of conflicts. Otherwise, if they don't have sufficient information, possibility is that the conflict will emerge, and then that will become much perhaps deeper. So, the better understanding of each other's functions, that is again important. If you are in the department of manufacturing then your functions are different. If you are in the department of, say, the information technology, your functions are different. If you are in the HRD department, your functions are different. If you are really in the finance department, your functions are different. And the area, sometimes the conflict might generate because people are not really understanding the areas and the roles and the functions that they have to play, the limitations of those functions. Because in some functions, for example, you may not have that much scope of going abroad to learn about organization management. Say, suppose you are in the department of finance, unless you are at the level of policy making, you are doing the financial management job in terms of the within an organizational activity, for which maybe if you are going abroad, that may not be that much beneficial to the organization, because organization also will look into that. I am just taking one example of, sometimes people are sent abroad and that has great incentive value and everyone wants to go, and then there are conflicts that such and such was sent and such was not sent and so on. So, we have to better understand each other's functions. So, that is a great responsibility on the part of the manager to make this a very smooth kind of a smooth selling of such ideas. Then the use of authority. I was told, see, the use of authority, we all know that in a formal organization there is authority structure, okay, without the hierarchy of authority perhaps no organization functions. And this not necessarily that every organization has many levels of authority. We have discussed that in a tall organization many levels are there, in a flat organization few levels are there. So, when we are looking at the use of authority in organization, we have to see that how authority has to flow from top to bottom and then from bottom to top, or what kind of authority flow has to be there, and very much tied to that idea of authority, the use of authority is also the idea of how do you communicate with people and how do you really resolve such an organizational problem. When we discuss in our next section about participative management, some of these answers perhaps you will get, because in participative management we are talking about some of these issues which will be related to the issue of industrial relations and conflict management, because that is one of the issues in the strategic management. Where we are wanting to actually manage our organizations very smoothly. So, we will be discussing about the use of authority once again, in fact many other points once again, once we are discussing the issue of participative management in our next lecture. But then we should understand that the authority should not be the autocratic type. If that is the autocratic type, the possibility of managing the conflict might reduce, and if it is a participative type, then the possibility of managing conflict will reduce. So we will be discussing this in our next lecture once again. Then the kind of communication that you might have, the coordination that you are in a position to do, perhaps you can again do that with great ease if you are a good communicator. And in our section on communication we have already discussed that there are formal communications, there are informal communications, and when we are trying to play in interpersonal communication strategies. We can use transactional analysis. In some of the earlier lectures we were trying to learn that the issue of communication that a manager could use for easing out the conflict in organizations. In fact, at that time we were just discussing the process of communication and not really so much of its application in conflict management. But when we look back to our earlier lectures, we have a recap of that. We can see that the coordination by a liaison, basically this coordination implies the good communication that you have between groups in organizations. So, this will help us in resolving many situations. Therefore, restructuring of organizations that had shown you some of these captions earlier. So, the restructuring of organization might also be one of the ways of resolving conflict. Restructuring could be in terms of merging. See, one thing is when we restructure organization, there are mergers, acquisitions of that kind, when the other organizations also come into picture. But let us for now let us look at the restructuring within an organization, when you can have the people placed in some other department, or you can merge two departments to have a better communication or better production activity. Sometimes if you are into a very say specialized one, maybe two departments might start working together to achieve better results, because they are doing similar works. And so instead of competing, instead of really conflicting, they might emerge as much stronger entities in an organization. So, it is very true about some of the teaching organizations. You might have different departments, but suppose you have the restructuring of the organization in that sense, the possibility of better results are there. Obviously, we are looking at the thing from the conflict management point of view. So, there will be no conflict as such, because they are now into one kind of a motivational mindset, we can say that. Is it making any sense? Is it making any sense? What I am trying to say is that if you are doing the similar kind of activities, instead of competing and conflicting, you are, if this restructuring is done in such a way that people are brought together, and then they start perceiving themselves as a group. And do you recollect that we were also discussing about what makes a group and what makes a team? So, when we are aware of the other person, we are psychologically aware of the other person, when we perceive ourselves as a group, then there is a group. Otherwise, people stand on the bus stop. Every day they might come there at 9 o'clock in the morning, and they know that okay, this person also travels by the same bus, but they do not form a group. You will form a group only when you are aware of each other, when you perceive yourself as a group. So, there has to be some kind of a common goal. Okay, so, that becomes very important. So, that feeling of being in a group, that is very important. So, the organization could structure the certain sections, certain departments, certain people to achieve better results. And following that is also the team functioning. Teams and groups, you would recollect, teams are also some sort of a group, you can say, but these are different in the sense that in a team there may be 4 persons or 5 persons, whatever. The team is made because of the complementary characteristics. So, all 5 persons, those who are there in a team, will have perhaps expertise in 4 or 5 different we can say fields or subjects or activities, and so there is some problem at hand, and you have a team where 5 experts come from different departments or different sections and they solve that problem. So, that is a team functioning, team management, and this is also in a way we can say that when we are talking about restructuring of organizations, we are talking about also the team management. So, this gives them much greater satisfaction than everything being done in the departments and then trying to arrive at, or only 1 or 2 departments are involved thinking that we can solve everything on this earth. Okay, the organizations do not function in the healthy way in that sense. So, well, I am just talking about 1 or 2 examples of restructuring of organizations, but there are immense possibilities. As a manager, you should look into these possibilities of restructuring, which could be in terms of technology, in terms of a system, in terms of optimization of resources, in terms of perhaps developing a work climate, in terms of developing some other strategies of HRD and the performance management and participative management. So, the restructuring of organization could be done in many ways, okay, not only in the physical sense, it could be done really in terms of involving people in decision making in that sense as well. So, if we want to really manage conflicts, then there are many possibilities for the manager. When we look at the issue of conflict management, we find that the important participants again in this conflict management are the managers, so right from the hierarchy of managers, the senior managers, middle level managers, the supervisors, and then you have the foreman and then employee. I am talking about a typical manufacturing industry, if you have that in mind. The supervisor, as you know, is the lowest level in the hierarchy, and actually he is a link between the workers and the higher level managers. So, and a great link between the management and the working employees. And sometimes the conflict might take place between workers and management, which is a very typical scenario. When we talk about conflict management, people will perceive that as a labor management conflict. But we have seen that there are many other types of conflicts in the organizations and in the minds of people. So, solving that labor management conflict where labor union plays a very important role, that is again a very important area that manager has to look into. And we are going to discuss some of these issues when we are discussing the role of unions in our country. Generally the examples, many of these examples I am going to bring only from the Indian industries or Indian organizations, and how these conflicts are resolved. And one of the methods that we are going to discuss, in fact that has become so important all over the globe today, is participative management, which we will follow discussing from now. Okay. But then before we move on to our next section on participative management, we should understand that the conflict management is a very serious I should say business. We should not many a times we as managers, we start thinking that that managing, perhaps if I can optimize resources, my management duty is done, or if I have the good technology, my management duty is done. But actually we have understood that also in the earlier part of the course, that it is managing human resources and managing organization in terms of these departmental conflicts. This is one of the challenging issues, and this becomes important aspect of our overall management strategy, because human beings, as you know, the other resources might deplete over times, over the years, okay, but the human resources actually do not deplete. With their experience they become more and more valuable, and this aspect we have to keep in mind while we are trying to manage the resources in our organization, and also while we are trying to understand the conflict management methods and strategies. So, let us move on to talk about the issue of participative management. In the next 2 or 3 lectures, we are going to discuss the issues of participative management, which you can say is an extension of our lecture on industrial relations and conflict management. So, in those lectures also we will come back and forth discussing some of the issues of industrial relations and conflict management that we have already done in these 2 lectures. So, let us move on to the issue of participative management, which is known as many names. We are talking about democracy at the place of work. We can talk about joint management, we can talk about joint decision making, we can talk about like there are so many connotations that are being used for the participative management strategies. So, we move on to the next lecture.